For the power moment today, I've been going through and talking with a lot of you about different things, and I wanted to get to one of those when I say, all right, what are those 5 things that as a real estate agent are your top 20%? And one of them is negotiations. So I wanted to really focus in today on how do you improve your skills in negotiating, right? Negotiating is one of those things that your clients are hiring you for. So understanding the best way that you can show up and maybe tips and tricks to work on and improve on how you're doing that will make you a better agent and a better candidate for who you work with. So we're going to deep dive into this, and a lot of the information is A, just things that I've learned over the years, but B, there's 2 people that I really like to follow when I'm thinking about negotiations. One, you guys know I've talked about him, Phil Jones, right? But the biggest one actually for this is Chris Voss. So his book, right, Never Split the Difference, is phenomenal, right? So I kind of wanted to go into a little bit about this and where things are at and really dive into what this looks like. And hopefully by the end, the goal is that you guys have 1 or 2 little tips or tricks. You can say, hey, how can I use this, right? How can I use this to even help my kids go to sleep on time, right? That's a hard negotiations. I still struggle with that one. So yeah, don't negotiate with terrorists. I can put my 2 kids in that category. And ultimately, that's where I just want saying, hey, what are those things that you guys can get from this to really continue to amplify your guys' ability to show up, be in the right spot, and for your people. So lots of slides. So it's going to be a trick of me trying to read some of this because some of it's really good and some of it's going to be diving in. And I'll try and make sure to be focusing on the right spots. But here's the thing. The core philosophy, the goal isn't to manipulate. It's to communicate so clearly and empathetically that the other side feels understood and moves towards yes. So a lot of people will say the enemy of yes is no. And the interesting part where you're diving into a lot of different philosophy with negotiations is sometimes the answer no is better for you to continue a conversation rather than being like some of the salespeople out there who will be like, they'll call you up and be like, you like more listings, right? I know all of you guys have gotten that call, right? And you're like, yeah, of course. It feels like a trap, right? So I kind of want to go through a whole bunch of these aspects with this of how do you have the language of influence in what you're doing. Okay, so we're going to go through 2 scenarios. We're going to dive into those a little bit here and there, and then really be diving into some concepts to help you guys with this. So scenario 1 is the inspection battle, right? It's having enough coming in and having enough repairs that you go in and say, hey, I need X amount repaired, right? And the seller's agent says, we're not doing any of it, right? Very dramatic, different sides, right? The second scenario we're going to be going into is even on a listing appointment. And you're on a listing appointment and you go through and they're doing multiple agents and they say, I've talked with a few agents. One of them will do it for 1%. Why should I pay you more? Right? We're going to go through some of that. And the reality is a lot of the times and most of the time when I've had conversations with agents, a lot haven't gone deep enough in these layers. The first layer is the positioning. This is honestly that demand. This is the number. This is where you're starting. This is honestly where I see a lot of agents go and they stop. They don't go any deeper. They don't do any more negotiation past that. It's like just all they're doing is being the middleman and moving something to the side. And that's it, right? Where layer 2 comes in is the interest, why they want it. What's that reason? What's the motivation behind it? Or the fear or the timeline, pride, money, relationship. What are those things to help it so that you can get people to move closer to yes, right? And then the last one is the emotion, how they feel. And this is an emotional state driving everything. This is where deals are won or lost. The great part with this is not only negotiating with the other party and the other side, this is also negotiating with your client. How many times are you talking with a client who wants to burn the bridge because all you did was maybe do position one? Something came up, this happened, they're like, screw the world, right? And that's like it. But if you know and can know their interests and emotion and get enough layers, then that helps you negotiate with your own clients. If you can also do the right thing with other agents, you can get past just the position. You can get to where they do things. You guys are in an interesting field where most agents like to talk. So if you ask a question, they will talk to you as long as they answer their phone. That is another issue. That's another issue. We won't go into that one for this part. So, but that's the thing, right? So going into this and how and where and what, because the big thing is we want to make sure that you're moving through this successfully, not only with what you do to negotiate for your clients, but also helping you negotiate with your clients to get the right outcome that everyone is wanting, right? Okay, so here's a quote in the book from Chris Voss. It says, negotiation is not about logic. And I get this all the time. I'm going to stop there. I have people call me and they'll say, this is just not logical. I tell them I gave them a CMA and they won't budge. Okay, let's go back to this sentence. Negotiation is not about logic. It's about emotional intelligence applied strategically. So how are you showing up and where and what does that look like? So here's one of the things from Chris Voss, and I love this part, is in his thing, he calls it tactical empathy, right? Isn't being nice, it's being precise. So here's what tactical empathy means. Understanding the other side's perspective so deeply that you can articulate it better than they can. Not agreeing with it, not validating it, accurately naming it. Okay? So some of the tools that you'll see in here are because of that. So when someone feels understood, their defenses drop. That's not manipulation, that's neuroscience. Right? Okay, so that's kind of what we're going to be diving into. So here's kind of the difference between maybe being nice or having some tactical empathy. Right? One is, all right, agreeing with them. You're right. Right? I hear all the time when I'm talking with people and they'll be like, they'll agree. Validate their position. Okay, right? Trying to please. Who in here is a little bit of a people pleaser?
Oh, I hate that.
Okay, avoiding conflict, right? This right here is very much on the being nice. Tactical empathy, which is something we can all continue to work on, right? Is understanding them, which is where we need to ask more questions. We need to be able to be more in that spot longer, right? Naming their emotion, gathering information, and disarming conflict, right? So this right here is going to be what we're doing. And we want to stop trying to be persuasive, but start trying to be accurate. Okay, so here's kind of this part right here. So again, we're back to scenario one. So this is the repairs needing to happen, right? Most agents say, well, these are legitimate issues and the buyer has a right to request for repairs. Okay, good. We're stating facts. We're stating what is maybe understood to some degree. Right?
Thanks for calling.
Yeah. Right? Because this is the logical side and it makes you defensive and it escalates everything. Right? Instead, if we did it more with some tactical empathy, it could sound something like this. It sounds like the seller has already put a lot of work into the property and the idea of more cost feels really frustrating right now. Yeah. The reality is you need to be waiting and be silent for a minimum of 4 seconds. Right? And some of you have a really good time at being silent.
Last week,
Yeah.
almost 30 minutes long.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And then the other side
The Aladdin factor.
did come up with basically what they were being asked of.
Correct. And silence,
Uncomfortable.
it is. And silence is one of those things that will push more things forward, and more questions will be answered during that silence. And a lot of the times we don't give it the time. So here's what happens. The other agent almost says exactly they've already and starts revealing the real story. So they start telling what really is. They start telling what they could do. They start saying the issues that have happened. And ideally what you're doing is you're getting it where there's a more likely chance to say yes, move towards that aspect, right? So that's kind of this whole part. So one of the concepts that I want you guys to start using and seeing where you can use it is called labeling. So labeling is an awesome tactic of where you verbally acknowledge the other person's emotion, right? So it's the most powerful de-escalation tool in negotiations. And this is where, if you're negotiating with your kids, it's a good one as well, right? So here's where it works. When you label an emotion accurately, that is a key point, the emotional charge drops. The amygdala in the brain's threat detector calms down. So scientifically is where this works. Because what you're doing is by saying what it is, that immediately the defenses on that part drop, right? So the formula is, okay, it seems like, it sounds like, right? It feels like. So after you label, again, be quiet. Close your mouth. Let them figure out what's next. Have it so you have some time for that, because that is where things happen. So again, if somebody has something or something, it sounds like your seller's really frustrated with how that happened. Right? Having it so that you can have that as one of your tools and understanding will give it where you now have more information and more ability to negotiate. Okay, here's the other one, B. All right, the other agent will do it for 1%. Why should I work with you? All right, the weak response. Well, I bring a lot of value. I'm going to do a song and dance, and I'm going to do more than the 4 Ps, and I'm going to do this, and I can do this and jump up really high, right? Okay, it's immediately going to put people's defense, and it sounds like every other agent. I guess probably other than jumping up really high. I don't hear very many agents using that one. Right? So the reality though is, if you now use a labeling response and use that tool, it sounds like you want to make as much money as possible, or sounds like you want to make sure you're not leaving money on the table. And you want to feel comfortable that the agent that you hire is actually worth the difference. Okay, again, these are real conversations. This is something that you can figure out and say, hey, when, where, and how. And practicing these different things will help you, but it has to be practice. That's why if I go to those 5 things and negotiations, one of them, one of the other ones was script practice, right? Practicing, learning, that right there of using your skills, not on real people. Maybe on your kids. You can practice on them. That's what I think they're there for, right? Okay. All right, number 3. This is concept number 3, and it's mirroring. This right here is a great one because there's a lot of different ways that you can mirror, right? You can mirror with your body. You could also mirror with how you're speaking. You can do a lot of that. This one that specifically it talks about is talking about basically doing a quick rephrase of what they said. It's great for a lot of reasons. One, it shows that you're listening. It shows that you are listening. It's weird. It's one of those things that if you do, then they will now feel heard. And they will also then continue to want to give you more information. Right? So our client really loves the house, but they're concerned about the foundation. Concerned about the foundation. Right? Yeah, there's a crack in the corner of the basement. They're worried it might be structural. Right? People will give you more information if they felt like they are heard. If you ask the right questions, not closed-ended, not only just yes and no, have it so you're having a dialogue. That's where a lot of this kind of goes in with itself to make that work. Okay, next one. And this right here is what I just mentioned. But this right here is the collaborated question. Phil Jones talks a lot about this, that you shouldn't be doing yes or no questions, right? So this right here is where you are making sure you're doing open-ended questions that give you in the right way. I love, though, from Chris Voss, a few of the things he says. One of them is, how am I supposed to do that? He, later on, I think I have that being one of his power ones that he uses. Because what it does is it puts it back in the other person's court if they're asking for something in a certain way, right? What's the most important to you about this decision? That right there falls a lot in lines with the what's important to you about this, and diving deeper into really that understanding aspect, right? How does that work for you? Inviting people to solve their problem. It does. It does get them involved. And the reality is, a lot of people have the answer already, and that's just kind of how do you ask the right questions to help get there, right? What would need to happen for this to work, right? Lots of good questions. And the reality is, the person who asks the questions is the one who's in control with the conversation. So don't answer your own questions, right? Be the one who asks the question and then shuts up, right? And do it in a way that you can kind of be there in that right spot. So, Phil Jones, questions are the fuel a good conversation runs on. Okay, next one. So how am I supposed to do that is the most powerful sentence in negotiation. That's one that was mentioned. I do love this one. So again, back to scenario A, the seller isn't doing any repairs, final answer. I understand. Help me understand what would need to happen for us to keep this deal together. Right? Or, how am I supposed to take this back to my buyers when the inspection found $22,000 of repairs? Right? What are those things that you're doing to put it back into their court, to be able to ask the right question, to not be aggressive? And that's also going to be depending on how you say it, which we're going to cover. Because of course, if I said this right here, how am I supposed to take this back to my buyers when the inspection found $22,000 in repairs? Versus, have you guys heard of the up versus the down on the end, right? The stereo voice, having it so that your deeper voice and going down swing instead of upswing at the end of questions. So it's one of those things that shows confidence versus that you are very confused, right? Okay, here's number 5, and I like this one. This one right here is a great one, and there's a lot of good times that you can use this with your clientele. This is a lot of good times you can use this one with agents that you're working with. But this right here is one of those tools that I find very effective to help break down the wall when something happens. Or if something happens, right? But here's the thing. It's called the acquisition audit. So the acquisition audit means proactively naming every negative thing that the other person might be thinking about you before you say it. Right? So this is kind of the thing where you use it to really disarm the situation and jump right into a spot where they're in that spot, right? Reality is people don't like to be sucked into a vacuum They will actually, a lot of the times, help you out of you saying the negative things that it was there, right? It's a lot of if you admit that, something happened or that this, right? It is counterintuitive, which I love, but it helps you do that. And they'll actually defend you a lot of the times, right? So how can you go in and say the bad things first? Or, hey, you're going to hate me for this, it's whatever, right? Ultimately, what you're doing is you're creating that spot and that aspect to make it where you're starting in a way that you can now have people ready to jump in and make things in the right spot, right? Don't kill the messenger. It very much is that concept. I love that. And that's kind of where it's when you're looking at it, how and where can you start with that negative or those things, right? Yeah. Okay, so scenario B. Okay, I want to be upfront with you. So this is the commission conversation. I want to be upfront with you. You may be thinking that all agents are basically the same and that paying a higher commission is just money out of your pocket with no difference in outcome. I'd think that too if I hadn't seen what actually separates results in this market. What happens? The seller almost always says, well, I do wonder about that. And now you're having a real conversation, not a defensive one. What Phil Jones loves to call this is bring the elephant into the room. How can you bring the elephant into the room with you instead of having it come in later, right? So whoever sets the frame controls the conversation. So what is the frame that you're working in and making sure to state that, right? Okay. Language of certainty. So I love this one as well. You have weak language and strong language. Weak language. I think that might work, right? Strong language. Here's what I know works in this market. Weak language. You might want to consider. Strong language. What I'd recommend is weak language. Hopefully we can get this done. Strong language. Here's how we get this done. Weak language. I feel like this is a fair price. And strong language. The data shows this is priced correctly. Right? Using the precise language, again, gets you back to that part where you are showing where you're at and you're showing that information. And it helps it so that there isn't as much doubt. Because if you use certain language, it's going to create that doubt, which is going to minimize your ability to be a good negotiator. Right? But I will say, you also want to, because Phil Jones loves this, is create doubt and gaps and openings by asking good questions, right? So if I could pivot this and I can say, going into that, it's like, what are those sentences and questions you could use to then create the doubt, right? Okay, so the questions change everything. So before you pitch anything, price, strategy, terms, ask the one question that unlocks the entire conversation. Before I share what I'd recommend, I want to make sure I understand what's the most important thing to you about this process. You should be asking more questions before you give your prescription. We give our prescription as an industry, just as people, way too soon. You'll say, I want to buy, and you'll say, I have the house for you. It's this one over here. Never. Like, I already know you, right? This is the house for you. Yeah, this is the one. It's perfect. Yep, exactly. So rather than asking more questions and really understanding where it's at, right? We jump to a prescription or the solution just way too soon, way too often. You probably, once you feel like you know the answer, you probably should ask 2 to 3 more questions before you even give that response. Right? Yeah, so hey, before I give my recommendation, I have a few more questions that I want to make sure that I'm getting a good grasp on this. Like, you mentioned this. How important is that to you? Right? What are those things that you're bringing back to the table and making sure that you understand and asking to go even deeper, right? It's one of those things that it's how much are you snorkeling versus scuba diving, right? Which I know some of you would say, I'm never going to scuba dive. This isn't questions. This is not literal. You don't have to go underwater hundreds of feet. I know, right? So the reality though is how well are you actually doing things or just skimming across the top? I have a checklist. I'm going to ask these 7 questions to make sure you're pre-qualified and make sure that I know exactly what's next versus really understanding the reasons, the why, the how behind that to really have it be where someone wants to work with you to that degree and level. Okay. So here's kind of a 5-step sequence to elite agents use in every tough conversation. 1, prepare. Phil Jones actually wrote a whole book on this if you want. It's The Work Before the Work. Awesome book. Honestly, also the title says almost all of it, but it is a phenomenal book. And it's doing the work before you actually go do the work and what that looks like, right? And how do you do that? So be prepared. So identify what's happening, how you need to open, what does that look like? 2, open up with empathy. Having it so that you're being there, present, understanding where they're at, their story, right? Getting to know them. Having it where you don't ask. So use good questions to help push you forward to that next part. Have it so it's an open dialogue and asking enough questions to truly understand, right? The next one is reframing. And this right here is very much using different words to help get a different result. An easy one is cost versus investment, right? Instead of saying, hey, this is the cost to sell your house, right? This is the investment or price. There's different words that you can plug and play, and what one is greater, and how are you reframing that, and when, where, and how, right? And the last one, move towards the yes. And that's where a lot of the mirroring and the different things, the tools that we've already talked about will help get you there. So I wanted to kind of go to this though, because this is one that I hear pretty often of the you're right versus that's right. So when you're going through, there's a big difference. When you say you're right, it's the person just wanting to be done with the conversation. So when are you saying that versus saying that's right to help it where you're actually continuing but showing that you're kind of in that spot? Because you're right's a brush off. It means that they want you to stop talking. It's what people say when they want to avoid conflict but aren't actually agreeing. Whereas if you're using that's right, that's the goal of negotiations because you want to find that in that what you're doing. So what I'm hearing is you've already invested significantly in this property. The timing of this sell is critical for your next move, and the last thing you want to feel is like you're being taken advantage of at the finish line. Is that right? Right. Getting it to the point where they can then acknowledge and the understanding helps you move closer to that yes, closer to filling in that gap. Right? Okay, here are the 5 most common mistakes. So if you have, any of these, then you can maybe try and work on them. Or if you have all 5, then you can work on those too. The first one is fearing the silence. We've kind of mentioned this a few times, and if you haven't heard me tell you to shut up more, then you missed part of what we were talking about today. Yeah, right. So this right here, rushing to fill in the quiet after making a proposal, right? Or answering your own question. 2, arguing logic versus emotion. Very common. It's one of those things that I see people work on and when they're doing things. They stick with the logic rather than working on the emotion, which is where everything really ends. Because that's, Okay, number 3, splitting the difference. It's always just, oh, I'm going to split the difference. Like, I'll meet you in the middle. I'll do this, right? Chris Voss, who's the FBI person, and of course, he says that he, in his job, can't split the difference. Send out the lower half. Right? So, okay, what does that look like, and how are you doing that in that way to make and find the right win-win? Right? Asking why. Way too many people ask why. Why immediately throws up defenses for majority of people. So instead of asking why, you should be using what or how. And you can phrase most questions in a way that you were going to ask a why question as a what or how and make it go in that way. I would say that there are a few times that a why is the right, but I think overall it makes more sense for your negotiations to use what or how. Right? Number 5, needing to be right. Right? That's a big thing with people. We want to be right. Kind of what that looks like. Okay, so the ultimate rule. Never be so sure of what you want that you wouldn't take something better. Right? Go into what the scenario should be, but don't be so set on what you want that something better is something that you're also not going to allow. I just recently, it was really fun with negotiations, was talking with a client. We were in multiple offer situations, and I asked a good question. I can't remember what it was. It's one of those ones where I'm like, dang it, I wish I could go back and listen to it. But instead, I was like in my head already thinking, hey, I'm going to get this. It's going to be over by this amount. The great thing is I shut up for a second after asking the question. They come back, even though I said you'll win it at X price. I gave too much information, but then the question I gave, they actually then came back 10K higher. And so I went back to my client and said, hey, you guys want 10 extra grand? And so then we sent over the counter offer with 10 grand higher, and they were excited. Everyone was excited. So again, don't be so sure that of what you want that you're not able or willing to get something better. Right? And where does that work? It happens a lot in what we do. So going in with the sure plan and be like, this is where it's going to be at is not always going to be it. So be open to that good conversations and asking good questions to see how and where it can happen. Right? Okay. So negotiator mindset. Make sure that you stay curious. Curiosity is what fuels the ability to ask good questions and have it be where you can then build more context, more rapport, more understanding to truthfully do something. 2, have it be where you're patient. I know a lot of us are running around like crazy. So if we want to have a good conversation, make sure we have the time set aside to actually ask the right amount of questions, right? And probably more than we should, right? And 3, this is not something that you come to this one class and you're done. Take something from this and go practice it. Have it be where, okay, for this week, I'm going to see every time I say a why question, I'm going to then immediately go and think of how can I change that to a what or how. Think of different skills and when and where you can use it. Yeah.
So if I were to become a master negotiator,
Yes.
where would I go to learn? What books do you recommend? What certifications do you recommend?
Yeah.
I just want to learn. I want to learn how to negotiate better.
Well, they do have a class, Master Certified Negotiation Expert.
Yep.
Just go on that website. Then you can grab your business card.
Then you can have one of those fancy titles.
Right.
So, but yeah, there is that one. So what is it called again? Okay, Master Certified Negotiation Expert. Yep. And then, like I was saying, a lot of this, honestly, conversation mastery, what we do every day after team meeting that Rollin runs, is a great one for you to dive into more question asking, which is the biggest part of negotiations when done right. I do think that reading Never Split the Difference is a phenomenal book, and you could easily take a section from it and really implement that. It's also a really fun one to listen to on Audible, right? Those kind of things will be very helpful for you. The reality is, okay, what, where, and how does that look to help you get there, right? And that's where these right here are going to be that, but you need to take the time to practice it to actually implement it. Yeah.
Who is not emotional, so how do you deal with applying to someone's emotions? This happened to me this last week.
You get it worse.
They have
Well, here, right? Great question. So running into a narcissist, right? The reality is, here's kind of my question, and this is why I'd say go read that book. Okay, good. Because ultimately, it's probably going to just be, I always point the target back to ourselves, right? It's probably that we're not asking the right question. Everybody has something somewhere in that way. The reality is that's where that skill comes in of asking the right questions. So it is focused back on how do we continue to improve that. That's hard because it's also great, how and where and what questions would that have been? I don't know the answer, right? Right? So, but that's kind of going to be that part of figuring it out. So good question. So here's kind of your toolkit. So these are the 6 I would say if you're going to be working on, how can you work on them to help you get to that right spot? And it is going to be a little bit of having that practice time and focusing on it. For example, the FM DJ voice, right? How well are you actually going through and asking questions that go on that downhill rather than ending on the up at the end, right? Because if you're going in and ending up, which it is more common for females than it is males to go on the upswing, which shows uncertainty. So how well do you listen to yourself on that aspect of going down on your question rather than up, right? And I'm just saying that in general. The reality is everybody who doesn't practice that skill goes up way more often than they go down. At the end of the question, it should go down, which shows certainty in your question, not that you're confused in what you're doing, right? The other skill that you can do, but that's this one right here of how, where, and what, and the downward inflection is the big part that you can do, right? That's a good one to work on. Okay, language of curiosity, coming to our conversation mastery class and working on improving questions, right? How can you collaborate with questions and getting better at open-ended ones, right? Acquisition audit, mirroring, labeling, right? Having it so that you're getting better at those kind of things will improve what you're doing. Don't try and do them all at once. Focus on something that you know that you can immediately implement and work on and practice to help you get to where you need. Okay, so negotiation is not a natural skill. It is a built skill. Questions?
Great job. Good job.
Okay. Lots of information. I know food's out there, so I appreciate you guys for coming. Continue to do even better for your clients. For your